There was an era, 1950s to 1980s, that at least for Unitarians, we were known as God's frozen people. Sermons were sometimes 45 minutes long. Can you imagine that? They were mostly academic. Music was primarily classical, but not always well played or sung. Candles were not important, and the lighting of the flaming chalice really only began to spread across our congregations beginning in 1983. Spoken word, of course, is still important, and Unitarian Universalists pride themselves on being the learned clergy. But now, more than ever, the beauty of a variety of readings, poetry, scriptures from many sources, music of many genres, feed our souls to not only address our troubled hearts, our fears, or our concerns, but also moments of humor and lightheartedness to lift our spirits. I recall when I found out about Unitarian Universalism, I was 15 years old at the time. I think many of us could be called out as having a UU birth narrative. Mine was as a teenager. Some might have what they even call a spiritual awakening. I had grown up in a household with a Roman Catholic mother with whom I live for and still care today, and my Spanish atheist father. I actually like to credit them both for my embeddedness in Unitarian Universalism. Fortunate for me, I was still in high school in 1963 when a mentor at the YMCA, upon my explaining my personal theology, told me, "You're a Unitarian Universalist." Well, he said, "Go to the library if you want to find out more about it." And they had one book called Why I Am a Unitarian Universalist by Jack Mendelson, who I had the great pleasure of meeting at General Assembly many years ago. He was closest to God that I can imagine because he brought me to this faith. The night that I read that book, I did it overnight with a flashlight under the covers in my bedroom and knew that this was the religion that I was seeking. A rational, ethical, historical religion, which I could freely embrace. And honestly, I think it was as close to having a conversion experience as anything I can imagine. And it was a spiritual experience. It was that same year, 1963, in which I experienced another spiritual awakening at the YMCA, at the camp there. Yes, the Young Men's Christian Association, where I was working at the time, at the desk and front desk, and also teaching swimming. The beauty of the mountain surroundings at that camp, the gathered community, the wonderful mentoring of kind and caring adults, I felt I had been transported to some kind of heaven. When my atheist father picked up my girlfriend and I from camp, in the car, she and I burst out into song, what we had been singing all weekend. Do any of you remember the song, I Believe? I believe for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows. I believe that somewhere in the darkest night, a candle glows. I believe for everyone that's gone astray, someone will come to show the way. I believe above the storm, the smallest prayer will still be heard. I believe that somewhere in the great somewhere hears every word. Every time I hear a newborn baby cry or touch a leaf or see the sky, then I know I believe. Well, my dad thought this was funny, so he started to chuckle. But then he realized how moved my other 15-year-old friend was and how we had experienced a spiritual community that had lifted us up. Now remember, I was a very impressionable young teenager. And it was the very same year I read Why I Am a Unitarian Universalist. My rational mind was now soothed by finding this religion, but my soul was still longing for beauty, for music, for poetry. I realized then and there that my seeking would never stop, and I hoped that Unitarian Universalists would grow to allow me to be both spiritual and religious. Jumping ahead several decades later, I had been a member of the Unitarian Universalist congregation for some time, and we called the first woman minister in the congregation's more than 100 years of existence. Not only was she a woman, but she was a lesbian. That was groundbreaking for this little congregation. On her first Sunday in the pulpit, she invited us into meditation. At that time, this was not a universal practice in Unitarian Universalist congregations. Seeing the surprised looks from many in the congregation and the pained looks in some of the older men's eyes, she said, "Now, don't worry, this is an invitation only. I'm not asking any of you to be bliss ninnies." And I have loved that word ever since, bliss ninnies. Reminds me of rabbity. She was funny, and she was open, and she allowed them to be open to trying it. They were respectful of her, she was respectful of them, even though they might have been initially reluctant. Honestly, I'm not sure how I responded, but I did participate. And it was for me then an untried experience, meditation. I think it may have taken me some time to relax, to breathe in and breathe out, and feel my roots going down into the earth, which she invited us to do, to trust, to stay open to an experience, which has now become a daily tradition, spiritual practice for me. Many of the women in the congregation were moved to tears. Some said they felt a shift in the earth in the way they experienced Unitarian Universalism. More kind, loving, people-centered, and happier than ever to be a Unitarian Universalist. Naturally, this is not all that this new minister brought to us. She was as smart as a whip, had been very successful in business and marketing before she became a minister, and she continually invited us to go deeper into ourselves, deeper and wider and opening, in a very provocative, intelligent, warm, and humorous way. While we Unitarian Universalists don't have a creed or a statement of belief that all of us have to sign on to, no dogma or rules from authority on high who determines what's absolutely true for every one of us, we also have the Unitarian Universalist principles. We, the people of our UU congregations, over a number of years, and after thousands of meetings and discussions of both laity and ministers and religious educators, all of us were invited to participate as we developed our 7 principles and purposes. Often they are referred to as that which is commonly believed among us. Our principles are not commandments. There are no shalt nots. Here instead, they are carefully articulated values statements which make up an interconnected host of Unitarian Universalist aspirations. We aspire to meet what is in that list of amazing intentions, value statements. This year I began preaching a series of monthly sermons about our principles, and I think that's something you've been doing here as well in my congregation at the UUFLB. Not surprisingly, many, even some of our longtime Unitarian Universalist members, were not conversant with their history and or how, taken together as an amazing interdependent list, every value, every item supports them all in their entirety. The third of our principles states that we covenant to affirm and promote our acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. This morning we heard many and varied expressions of what spirit means to us. I guess we need to come to some kind of agreement, however, for this morning's purpose of what we might call spiritual. So I would like to propose that for just this morning, we could define spirituality as the relationship that people have with themselves, with others, with their community, and something larger than ourselves, no matter how you want to title that. This spirituality is lived out in a variety of spiritual practices: prayer, meditation, reflection, rituals, and some of these bring a person closer to their inner being. Also, things like biking and gardening and playing and singing music and so many other activities. It's also expressed in our theological understandings as well, whether these be in Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, or any other faith tradition, or no faith tradition at all, but powerful and meaningful. And through atheism, agnosticism, pantheism, naturalism, etc., etc. What is not found in our Unitarian Universalist principles are people who believe in X are idiots. Okay, I know it's challenging sometimes when someone tells us what they believe, but we need to accept where people are on their continuum in their spiritual journey. But it's an important question, and it fits in with that interconnectedness of our principles. We covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. So you can see how these, even the first three, fit together so beautifully like a puzzle. In 2005, the Unitarian Universalist Association published a study of our congregations called Engaging Our Theological Diversity. In this district, the Reverend Tom Owen Toll and the then district executive, Reverend Ken Brown, created a workshop in which clusters of congregations could explore together how we hold differences. Did any of you participate in any of those workshops? They were held all around the district, and I did. I participated in the one in San Dieguito. What surprised us all was how much we had in common. All those differences really pointed us to how much we had in common, because all of us thought that the others disapproved of our ideas or ways of being spiritual, and how much we longed to have our spiritual and spirituality practices respected. In my own congregation at the time, I was serving the Anaheim Unitarian Universalist Church. I led us through the same program with the same results. Then I asked a few of our participants to work with me to create a series of worship services in which they would share the faith of a theist, the faith of an agnostic, the faith of a biblical humanist, and also to share with us their practices. My favorite was a gentleman who had been fairly new to the congregation who wanted to share faith of an agnostic. So he brought in a great big question mark, which I still have, that he had made into a piece of jewelry, and he had it hanging on his over his vest. And he started out saying why a person should believe. And then he flipped around, and he was in character, and now he was the agnostic. And then he had his question mark, and they would flip around again. And I swear I need to wear that sometimes. It's on my jewelry board. In a few minutes, after a brief period of silence, so that each of you may spend a little time in reflection, I'm going to ask you to pair up with someone else, someone you don't know everything about, even though I find that sometimes you pair up with somebody that you've known for years and you didn't know this about them. I'd like to ask you to share one of two things. Have you had what you would consider a spiritual experience? Or, because we don't have all the time in the world, if you could just say to your partner a little about a spiritual practice in which you regularly engage. So this is, have you had a spiritual experience? Do you have a spiritual practice? One or the other. And I'm not going to ask you to repeat back to me. There's going to be no, somebody tells me what they said. So this is just between you and your partner. Our acceptance and encouragement to find spiritual growth in our congregations. So, I don't really like that gong this morning. I didn't like the sound of it. I have my, do you remember these? You used to have sets of these. Do you remember these, Melissa? You're too young. this was a set of bells, and this one is the, what is this one? This is an F. And I've had it since I've been 5 years old, so that's 66 years ago. That's how long this bell. So I'm going to ask you to find a partner, and then I'm going to ring the bell, and then one of you will ask the question, and I will ring the bell again, and it will be time for your partner to ask you the question or respond, and then I'll ring it again and we'll be done. All right, so first of all, find yourself a partner. Trade. It's really difficult to bring these conversations to an end, and I wish I was out there listening to all of you. I'm sure it was fascinating. So now you're going to know something about somebody else in this congregation which you didn't know before, and so I encourage you at coffee hour or at some other time to continue that sharing, or perhaps ask that question or share with someone with whom you were not partnered this morning. Our third principle, acceptance of one another as a core value for us in our congregation, says a lot about Unitarian Universalists. In some faith traditions, there is often only one way, and I mean only one way, for you to legitimately experience your spiritual self. For us, it is essential that we allow each of us to have our own place in our own spiritual journey. It is who we are, and it is who we want to be encouraged to be our best spiritual selves. It is to provide a place where wherever we are on our spiritual journey, we're welcomed right here in Tapestry. As we each continue to seek and to find what brings us healing and wholeness, joyfulness, happiness, we need both the inner and the outer communal journey. The Reverend Dennis McCarty calls himself the gentle atheist, Unitarian Universalist minister. He says this: each of us goes through life self-contained and alone, within a space of a soul from which we look out at the world, which no other can fully enter. Yet our soul space becomes healthier, happier, wiser, and more fulfilled when we loosen our hold enough to look at others, to listen to others, to share with others, to love and to laugh, as well as weep with others. There is no doubt that changes will continue to occur for all of us on our spiritual journeys. We will experience our joys and sorrows, and our spiritual growth will accompany them. Here, together, we will have the opportunity to be strengthened and challenged, comforted and inspired, and loved in mutual support as individuals and in a community, to do what needs to be done, to do better, which may even mean to do less. How fortunate we are to be in this spiritual and religious home. Amen, and blessed be.